episode 2 of Empower, the series designed for recruitment, retention, and empowerment for women during Women's History Month. This episode, Attracting Top Talent, focuses on strategies for recruiting women in today's workforce. My name is Janella Bella. I'm CEO of Diverse Solution Strategy Firm, and I'm your host. We'll be joined by Keisha Martineau from Microsoft and Rita Johanna from E3 Works today. This series is in partnership with the Job Shop and West of Windsor. When we're talking about recruitment of women, it's important to draw attention to understanding barriers and biases. Barriers and biases are something that we talk about a lot, but we don't necessarily look at the intricacies and nuances of it in various sectors of our organization. When we look at the recruitment component of it, we need to look at how common recruitment biases could deter women from applying, or women could be deterred from liking your organization or seeking out positions within your organization. So, I'm going to talk about some of those common recruitment biases. The first one is unconscious bias in resume review. So, this is a manual and an AI consideration. So, if you're doing manual resume review, it might be your unconscious bias of an applicant's name, the spelling or grammar that they use, or if they have errors or career gaps in their resume. Now, a bias means that it could be something that you prefer or something that you don't like. So it could be a name that's familiar to you. Maybe you recognize the last name of a certain family or a demographic. And also, if there's more spelling errors, we might feel like that person is uneducated versus considering if English is their second language. If there's career gaps, we might assume why that career gap exists. And so we are building our biases into our understanding of why these people have certain information or don't. When we consider the AI aspect of it, it's important to draw attention to the risks that AI bring for resume review. Something as simple as spelling and grammar is something that we don't necessarily want in the resumes that come across our desk, but misspelled names, misspelled cities and locations can trigger that lack of proficiency. So if someone is born outside of Canada, or their schools and their background has a lot of names that will come up misspelled, then that might create a barrier for them and not being reviewed or sent to you for review through an AI resume review platform. So some of those common biases, just at the very outset, say that resumes may not even be considered simply because of how they're reviewed in that initial process. Then, when we start to look into the recruitment process a little more, we talk about the engagement that people have with recruiters. So, there could be inconsistent interview questions or questions that have biased context. For instance, if you have a particular experience as a recruiter, or you have a particular line of questions that you like, you may change that depending on if you may think you already know the background of an individual. So if you know they're a parent, or you know that it's her first career, or she's coming back into the career field after taking time off, you might ask different questions than you would someone who is not under those assumptions. Similar to that is affinity bias. Affinity bias is when we treat people who are like us differently than people who are not like us. And so, if you're a female recruiter, hiring women may be a different perspective than if you're a male recruiter. Or if you are hiring someone who has a name that's similar to yours, or a cultural background or religion, maybe they like the same music as you. Maybe you see the background in their video display of things that are in their environment that are familiar to you. They may have grown up in the same community or gone to the same schools. A lot of these things can subconsciously create an affinity towards someone and make us feel like we like them more, or they're a better candidate than someone else. And so this allows us to judge them less harshly. But the same happens for people who aren't like us. If we cannot find that common ground or that relationship to them in one way or another, we may have more negative bias towards them. We may judge them more harshly, or have more questions or more concerns over some of the barriers that they have, or a lack of skill or a lack of experience. So, our affinity bias when we're recruiting is we may prefer people because we understand them, or we think that they can get the job done, And that can allow us to have more lenience when it comes to the relationship we have with people. When we're looking to alleviate those biases in the process, we need to also look at how we're promoting the job description. So another common recruitment bias is the way that descriptions are written. We could be using masculine coded words versus gender neutral words. So that could mean we are using terms like dominant or competitive or rock star. And so self identifying as dominant, competitive, or a rock star might not be common for a female applicant who is looking to um, investigate the role a little more. So, using more gender neutral language, focusing on the skills that are required and the technical components that are more tangible to measure versus dominant and competitive or a rock star. Because when you look at the tangible aspects of being a rock star, it can be challenging to articulate that. And so, putting it in a job description can deter people from applying. A lack of flexibility, which may also show up in a job description, or the perception of someone's lack of flexibility. So, as a recruiter, you may perceive that someone's capacity is based on their identity or demographic. So, if they're a parent, you might perceive that they have limited capacity or that they might be more invested in their family life versus in the job position. And so, that may deter them from you from having them move forward in the process, as well as they may not see that flexibility open within the job posting. And last of the common recruitment biases is cultural norms that discourage women from self promotion and negotiation. So, in the recruitment process, when women are expected to promote themselves and cheer themselves on, that self esteem, that self worth might be limited based on that cultural norm of women not being more so outspoken and self promoting. And so that could deter them from being a higher candidate because they might be seen as not competitive or dominant or that rock star. So some of those common recruitment biases are just things to consider when we're looking at barriers that exist in recruitment in general. As those commonalities, and those go much deeper and they're nuanced to every individual. Your biases are different than other people's biases, your affinities are different than other people's affinities. And so being aware of it is really the key here. When we're aware of the potential barriers and biases that exist, we're able to consider more deeply how we're doing things so that we can alleviate those barriers and biases to create a more inclusive process. So, when I want you to think about this for the perspective of a recruiter or an organization, I want you to consider, does it use phrases that might discourage female applicants when you're talking about job descriptions? So, do you have job descriptions that discourage female applicants? How do you know they do, or how do you know they don't? Because it's very easy to say, no, the job description doesn't discourage female applicants, but we also don't have female applicants. So, starting to analyze what type of messaging you're sending within those postings so that you can determine if that's a key component. And then for candidates, considering what type of language deters you or what makes you count yourself out. This is really important because we are also a part of that process. So, as an employer is taking on the role of rewriting or creating a different messaging for job postings, it's also important for female applicants to consider how they're interpreting job postings and how they're better understanding the process for themselves. We may be counting ourselves out from a job and not applying to it because we say, oh, we're not qualified, or that's not me, or they won't pick me. So, on both sides of it, it's important to consider the messaging and the perception that comes from the type of language and the process that we use. So, to talk a little bit more about employer brand, there's three components here that are really important to consider. First is that messaging that I was just talking about. Second is representation. And the third one is engagement. So, starting with messaging, when we're talking about messaging, it's important to consider the different perspectives. So, the person writing it is going to have a perspective based on their identity and lived experience and their understanding of the role, the workplace, and the expected candidate. There's going to be a different interpretation from various candidates. And so understanding what your brand looks like outward is really important. And this goes beyond just the job posting. This is the consideration of what your websites look like, what your social media looks like, and how your brand is being perceived by other people. So, some questions you can ask yourself are: what is the messaging around inclusive and equitable workplaces? What does inclusion and equity mean to your organization? How are you presenting that to the public, or even how are you presenting that to people internally? Are policies and practices showcased? How are you showing that? It is maybe not just always the blurb at the bottom of a job description that says we are an equal opportunity employer, because that is now on so many. But then we know some of the people that incorporate that, those organizations aren't doing that equitable work. So, how are these policies and practice showcased beyond just saying that you have them? And then third, is there transparency around pay, advancement, and benefits? Because those are questions that a lot of people want to ask or may not be comfortable asking in that recruitment process. How are you showing people that we want you, we're going to compensate you, we're going to advance you, we're going to help you be nurtured and thrive as a human being within our organization because we want you to be successful? And so the messaging around how people are treated like people and celebrated as people and valued within an organization is very important, because then that draws in those diverse populations. When we talk about representation, very similar to messaging, is how are you showing that you're doing the work, that you are equitable, that you are inclusive, that you have that diversity? So, are women being featured on websites, social media, and other imaging? How are they being featured? Are they prominent leaders? Are they in the background? Or is it what types of posts are they on? Is it only on celebration posts, or is it on this is what we're doing posts, or our typical branding posts? And so, kind of navigating what that representation looks like. Are there success stories of women thriving within your organization? You have to engage with your organization, with women in your organization, to see if they're thriving, and then to celebrate that when they are. What recognition is there for women? How are you recognizing women? How do they want to be recognized? And then are you doing so within your organization and beyond? And further, what is the credible evidence of this action? Are you making sure that these are real life people, that these are real life success stories, these are sustainable success stories? Or is this just a one off success story and it's maybe just to kind of surface level have performative response to inclusion? And the last piece there for engagement, we're talking about initiatives and actions that are incorporating women within your organization and beyond. So, what women led initiatives are on social media or other forms? How are you including women? How are women being showcased and highlighted for the work that they're doing and spotlighted? What initiatives are being done? How are you celebrating that? And how are you keeping that action alive? Can women collaborate internally and externally? How are you allowing that mentorship, that peer support, that community to thrive and develop within your organization? And also, are you expanding that outward? If you're in a traditionally male dominated industry and there's a struggle to increase female representation in an organization, how are women within the organization collaborating with women outside of the organization, across industry, across the potential candidates that could be coming in? That's an opportunity to showcase that representation. It's an opportunity to increase your messaging, and you're doing it through engagement. And then the third one is: are there joint events or initiatives supporting women? How are you integrating the action with the community and with the broader success of the people that you're supporting, your clients, and all of your other stakeholders? What I want you to think about are a couple things here. So, if you're an employer, I want you to think: are you using stock images and generic or blanket statements when it comes to supporting women? So, stock images is the easiest way to increase representation of women, but it often shows to be very performative, especially if there aren't women in your organization and you have just a showcase of diverse populations, and then they aren't there once people get in, because that brand will be broken very quickly. And then when it comes to generic and blanket statements, are you making a Happy Women's History Month statement, or are you looking more deeply at what that means, what action can be taken? Because those performative actions are seen through by a lot of underrepresented populations, and then it can hinder the effectiveness of your branding, because it's going to seem fake and it might not have that authentic, genuine action that you're intending to put forward. And then for candidates, I want you to consider: how specific are the examples and indications of inclusion? If you're looking to invest yourself within an organization, are you analyzing the type of organization they are? Are you looking to see if they're a good fit for you based on that pay or benefits? Or are you looking to see if they are a good culture fit for you, if they're going to support you and create a sustainable workplace for you in the long term? And so doing so is analyzing what those examples are of inclusion. Are they real people? Are they showing the day to day in terms of and the larger initiatives that are taking place? Because those types of considerations are important when you're analyzing a brand. So, what does this look like practically? For individuals who are within an organization, there's three steps that you can take. So, as an employer, you look at the before you meet the interview process and then expanding your pipelines. So, before you meet people, before you get into that recruitment process, it's important to consider what inclusive language looks like, addressing skills versus experience. What are you really looking for in candidates? Because the way that you put information out there can deter candidates from applying, and how are you weighing the critical skills versus previous experience in that exact role? Transferable skills are really important, soft skills are really important, and those can be developed in various spaces, especially if someone's coming out of being a caregiver into a career or they have career gaps. What are those skills you're looking for, and how does that fit into your expectations? And then also reviewing your screening process. What types of processes are being used? How are there potential biases and barriers within that? How might you be screening people out instead of screening people in? When you're looking at the review process, looking at a structured analysis of whether someone's a qualified candidate or not, looking at training on bias mitigation. So, again, we're not getting rid of bias. We need to understand what bias is so that we can alleviate that within the process. So, if you have an affinity towards people who went to the same university as you can alleviate that bias. And then you know that you're picking the best candidate versus just picking someone that is familiar to you. And then lastly, for the interview process, making sure that you're having a diverse interview panel. If you have one person doing all your interviews all the time, it can be very limiting to the diversification of your employment staff. So when you have diverse interview panels or diverse eyes on the candidates, it allows you to look more comprehensively at their skills and qualifications and whether they would be a good candidate for the role versus one person. When it comes to expanding your pipelines, which is making a broader reach, a bigger net to have women come into your spaces, it's looking at partnerships with women's organizations, looking at opportunities for supporting women, supporting programs, bringing people into your industry if you're a traditionally male dominated industry, or showcasing the opportunities that they have within your organization, as well as internal advocacy and allyship. Because if you're developing the people within your organization, they are going to then share that branding and share that messaging and show that representation outward. So you're integrating all aspects of your community, the potential candidates, the people that are also doing the work in the community, and the people in your space themselves. When you're doing all of that, you're building a comprehensive cyclical process because you're using inclusive methods, you're interviewing inclusively, you're creating inclusive engagements and connections and collaborations. And so the process of increasing representation of women in that recruitment process and hopefully in your organization can be successful. So for candidates, practical strategies fall on your research, your preparation and advocacy, and the ability to showcase yourself. So looking at research, reviewing company materials, analyzing what they have out there and what they're promoting as being inclusive and representational of women in the workplace. Check employee reviews and look for themes. So, is this something that they're just doing this month because they want to increase representation of women, or is this a theme long term? And when you research a company, it builds that culture fit so that you know you're going into somewhere that's psychologically safe, somewhere that can support you, and somewhere that you can thrive. And so, your investment of yourself, the process going through a recruitment process, is very important that you understand that they're going to be supportive and help you be successful as well. Preparing and advocating for yourself, anticipating common biases, because we know biases won't just magically be mitigated, they're going to always exist. And so, how are you going to anticipate those common biases and then prepare confident responses? How can you support yourself against those biases that are going to exist? How can you shift to measurable outcomes so that those biases can't perpetuate? And so when I talk about measurable outcomes, it's I'm a great leader is a non-tangible attribute. And so if I say I'm a great leader, I'm very committed, I am passionate, that is something that we may be able to describe ourselves. But if I say I led a team of 500 and we worked on these projects that developed X number of dollars and we increased our profitability by this, you're giving those tangible, measurable outcomes that can show that you're advocating for yourself and your skills. And thirdly, showcase yourself, highlight very specific attributes that you have, be very precise in the language that you use, look at those measurable outcomes, look at the job postings and be responsive to them, and also leverage your personal branding and make sure that you have an understanding of who you are, why you're qualified, and why you should be in this role. So now we're going to move into our section of asking an expert. So today we are joined by two recruiters, Keisha Martineau of Microsoft and Rita Johanna from E3 Works. And we're going to ask each of them two questions. One question that is for the employer perspective and one question that is for the candidate perspective. And we're going to get their understanding of how we can improve our approaches to increase the representation of women in workplaces and support women in the recruitment process. So our first expert that we're going to get insights from is Rita Johanna, recruitment manager at E3 Works. Rita is going to share a little bit about some insights for employers as well as candidates. So we're going to start with your insights for employers. What innovative strategies have you seen companies use to attract more women in underrepresented groups, particularly in industries where they are underrepresented?
So, as a recruitment manager, I've seen firsthand how innovative strategies can help break down those barriers and bring more women and underrepresented groups into industries where they've previously been excluded. Here in Windsor, we've had some really great initiatives that are actively creating pathways for women to enter what would be considered male-dominated fields like skilled trades and manufacturing. The two specific organizations that I wanted to touch on and highlight here are West and Build a Dream. So WEST stands for Women's Enterprise Skills Training, and they run a program called CNC Industrial Mechanic Millwright Pre-Apprenticeship Program for Women, a little bit of a mouthful. Essentially what they do is they support low-income women who are unemployed or underemployed by providing them with hands-on experience to enter a field that they might not have been able to before. The reason that I think that this is so important is because it eliminates the barriers to entry by providing free training and industry recognized certificates. It also creates a supportive environment where women can train alongside other women, which naturally just boosts confidence in a field where they would be viewed as a minority. A program like this, in my opinion, is life-changing because it allows for women to be given an equal opportunity to men in an industry where they would almost never really have that. By the time that they fully completed the program with the same certificates as their male counterparts, they've built the confidence needed to enter that field with their head held high. The other organization is Build a Dream. They specifically work to offer programs and mentorship that help women and girls explore underrepresented career pathways by partnering with industry professionals in fields that are typically considered male-dominated. They collaborate with schools and employers to introduce young women to career paths that they might not have previously considered. It also challenges stereotypes about what careers are for men and shows that it challenges that kind of stereotype and shows that women can and do excel in those kind of skilled trades. The key takeaway from programs and initiatives like West and Build a Dream is that attracting more women and underrepresented groups isn't just about opening the doors, but it's about providing the tools and the career paths that allow for them to thrive in those industries. I think that Windsor is doing a really great job with leading the initiatives like this, and I do hope that we continue to do so.
Thanks, Rita. And that kind of extends on the conversation that I was just sharing about extending pipelines and making sure your pipeline is expanded through partnerships and programming that supports the demographic you're seeking to acquire and not just saying, where are all the women? And so you're
Mhm.
kind of building into that community initiative as well.
Mhm.
Now I'm going to shift and ask you a question for candidates. So women that are looking to get into various spaces, what are some common mistakes women make during interviews and how can they avoid them to strengthen their candidacy?
So Firstly, I think it's important to note that interview success isn't just about what we as the candidates do, but it's also about the environment that we're setting as the hiring managers as well. With that being said, there are some common patterns that I've seen in interviews that can impact a woman's confidence and in turn impact the outcome. The first mistake that I see is downplaying accomplishments. Many women will use we instead of I when discussing their success stories and their contributions. Naturally, this just minimizes their impact, and my advice here is just to own your success and be confident in saying, I led this initiative or I drove this result. It's not bragging by any means, it's just showcasing your value. The second mistake that I see is apologizing too much. And I'll be the first to admit that this is something that I find myself doing all the time in my career. Women tend to respond with questions by saying, oh, sorry, I don't have the experience there, or I don't think this is what you're looking for. My advice for women here is try to avoid that kind of diminishing language. Instead, reference kind of transferable skills and focus on what you do bring to the table as opposed to what you're lacking. The third and one of the most common mistakes that I see is not negotiating for salary or asking any kind of follow-up questions, and this also has a lot to do with lack of confidence. Women are actually statistically less likely to negotiate salary or ask about any kind of career growth opportunities. It's important to remember that an interview is a two-way conversation. I personally love and highly respect when candidates ask thoughtful questions about my team, about possible career pathways or any kind of advancement opportunities. It shows that you aren't just looking for any job, but that you're looking for the right fit for you. At the end of the day, as cliche as it sounds, confidence is key here. You need to really own your worth and prepare and know that you're bringing value to everything that you're doing. Another thing that I always say is remember that you're interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you. It just makes you feel a lot more comfortable and more as an equal, which naturally will just drive better results.
Thank you. And I am also the type of person that uses we, and I've been called out on it so many times because everyone's, who is the we? And
Yeah.
I've realized that when I use we, it's because I feel like it builds trust in others. Like, well, someone trusts me because they're working with me. So we are doing
Mhm.
this together. And
Mhm.
so it builds that relationship. Thank you so much, Rita. I'm going to shift to Keisha and see your insights as well on the changes that employers can make as well as candidates. So we'll start with the question for employers. And I'm going to ask you just kind of what can or how can organizations proactively identify and mitigate unconscious gender bias throughout the recruitment process, which the recruitment process is a lot bigger than people think, from job postings all the way to that final decision.
Absolutely. And, it's an interesting journey, but I think there's a couple things that, organizations can do to really make sure that they are best identifying candidates, particularly candidates who may not have been the standard or the norm going in. So internally, one of the things you can do as an organization is just, de-identifying resumes, removing names and any sort of pronouns that are on the resume, make it as, about the experience. And so that could really help. Training awareness goes incredibly far, not only just for your HR team, for anyone involved in the HR process or the recruitment process. So if it's HR managers, leads, anyone who is wanting to go through that process to find the best candidate. And, one of those things you can do is inclusive training to understand unconscious bias. We all have it. And so being able to identify what that is and then working through that, especially in a recruitment process, really opens your eyes to a wider scope of individuals. And inclusive job descriptions, removing gender language, gender-based language. You'd be quite surprised. Statistically, there's organizations that use rock star, and there's these terms that may seem like a fun, this is an energetic kind of person, but typically those are generally more masculine termed words. So creating gender neutral language that women and maybe underrepresented groups feel more comfortable because they don't feel like, hey, that's for a specific person, is for everyone. And then finally, standardizing the interview process. It may sound very basic, but just making sure that everyone is going through the same interview process, whether it's creating templates, asking the same questions. So that way you're creating a baseline and really identifying the candidate based on their experience, but also allowing all the candidates to participate. So it's not just a specific group that gets through the interview process.
Thank you. And I think when we look at how we're bringing people into the process versus selecting them out of the process. We look at what we can do to attract women from various things, from the language to the standard questions to the way we engage, and that all the way through creates that brand, that messaging that really supports. And so, Keisha, as a technical recruiter in engineering for Microsoft, which is a traditionally male-dominated industry, I want to ask you some questions about candidates as well. So, how can women leverage mentorship, sponsorship, or professional networks to access recruitment opportunities and career advancements?
This is such a wonderful area that I think a lot of us, myself included, don't leverage. And one of the things that we can do, whether you realize it or not, is first and foremost mentorship. Be a mentor. Be a mentor for individuals who might be coming up through their career. You can be a mentor to individuals who are within maybe the same level as yourself. You'd be quite surprised when people generally start talking to each other, how providing guidance and support really help develop skills. As Retta said, building that confidence to navigate your career. These are areas that, I don't think we talk enough about, and being able to support each other. Now, on the flip side of that, sponsorship. Sponsorship is something that even goes a step further, where having leaders advocate for you, being able to recommend you for maybe high visibility projects or promotions, or just really other career advancements. This is a phenomenal way to help women and underrepresented groups navigate maybe a space that seems foreign, or one they're not familiar with, because maybe it hasn't been really been open to them in the past. So that's something that I think is incredibly powerful. And then, the last couple of things that I think we can all do and already have access to is professional networks. Participating, whether your organization has employee resource groups, I highly recommend joining that. And if they don't, maybe be the first to create that, whether it's a women's network, or here at Microsoft, we have Black at Microsoft, the BAM community. In my previous roles, when I worked at Salesforce, we had Bold Force. So it's a really great opportunity to create community within your organization that other people might say, hey, I'm actually interested in that as well. How can I participate? And then grow that network. And then finally, leveraging your professional network. And this is something that is right at your fingertips if you have a LinkedIn profile. I think it's really, really important to leverage what you already have in front of you. So whether you went to a college or a university, or just did a 6-week crash course, there's people within your network that you can work with. And so I highly recommend, whether it's joining an alumni association or an engineering group, in my case, for the people that I work with, but ultimately even organizations in your community. It doesn't have to be this big, broad thing. It can really just start small and then grow that organically. Start with a network of people within your business or your organization. See who they know. And then from there, you'd be quite surprised how quickly that network grows of individuals that could potentially be mentors, sponsors, or really just another ally within your career development journey.
Thanks, Keisha. And I think that when you're talking about leveraging our professional networks, something that's important to recognize is that our expertise is not what we know, it's what we share. And so when we give that opportunity to share our insights with other people and to expand that, it really creates that brand, that platform that will then provide more opportunity for us. Keisha and Rita, so much for your insights. I will put your connection information in the comment section so that people can connect with you, and if they have more insights that they need for recruiting as well as candidacy, they can reach out to you for those. I really appreciate you taking the time to share your expertise with our audience. And for everyone that is watching, our next episode, episode 3, focuses on retaining women through inclusive culture. So once you've attracted them, once they're in there, how do we keep them around? So that is going to be next week, Tuesday, March 18th. with Kathy Monchamp and Christine Bandy from Libra Credit Union, an organization that shows women that they matter and has quite a number of women in various leadership roles that are empowered and leading exciting initiatives. So if you're not already registered, register at diversesolutions.ca/empower. And I want to say thank you one more time to the Job Shop and West of Windsor for partnering with us on this program and through these initiatives. Thank you for taking the time to learn more about recruiting, retaining, and empowering women during Women's History Month. And thank you.